First of all, welcome to the webinar. I do appreciate you coming. It was a little bit of a short notice. I recognize a bunch of your names on here. Some of you do know me, some of you don't know me. My name is Sean Chalice. I like to call myself a recovering realtor. I was in your seat for about 26 years. Helped about 2,000 people buy, sell, or invest in a home as a real estate professional before I became a mortgage loan officer about 4 or 5 years ago. And the reason why I say recovering is I haven't done a sales transaction in about 4 years now, almost five, other than doing my own transaction for just a flip for my wife and family and I. So today I'm here as one of your affiliates. I actually work for US Bank. We're the fifth largest bank in the United States. And I am one of the, I want to say 30 or so or more. I'd have to get an exact number from Pat for the NCJAR affiliates. And what are the affiliates? We're like the mortgage people, the insurance people, the home inspectors, all the people that are the other 40 people involved in a real estate transaction that are outside of the borrower, the buyer, the seller, and yourself and the other agent. There's a whole bunch of other moving parts that go along with it. And I just wanted to, first of all, thank the Nick Jar's affiliate group for one, allowing me to present for them. And number two is Crystal, Ella, and Bella. I can get all those names right. Mary and all those people behind the scenes and the president of the association who is taking the reins. They're doing a fantastic job at trying to bring more value to you as the agents. And I'm going to ask you guys, if after this is over, if you can write and send an email to your organization and say, hey, here's what I got out of today, and here's what I think we could like learn more from. And if there's other things that we're not talking about, reach out to us and reach out to Crystal and her team and see if maybe, I'm sure that there's somebody in the industry or in the affiliates or in the actual organization that can actually probably present some very unique things to answer what you're looking for. So today we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects is, what are the 4 strategies to motivate buyers and sellers to get them off the fence? And what do I mean by that is we went through a very challenging time when I first moved into the mortgage space. It was 2022. Rates went through the roof. They went from being like 3 and 4% to 4, to 6 and 7, almost 8% in some cases. And people with 2.5% interest rates and all that kind of stuff, all of a sudden they got a little nervous. So first of all, why would I say there's 4 strategies? Is because these are the things that when I would go into an office or when I was, coaching teams, I actually was a one-on-one coach for Keller Williams for a number of years. I've coached a bunch of different places. And usually the same kind of challenges were coming up over and over again. So this particular presentation was a function of that. And we kind of want to just answer those. So as I said, first of all, US Bank, I'm going to be your presenter and your partner here. So the agenda today, what are the 4 secrets that we're going to get out of working with buyers and sellers and getting them off the proverbial fence, right? Hey, do me a favor, put in the chat if you've had somebody say to you one of those 4 objections, and just put the number in the chat if you've actually had that happen over the past 10 or 12 months or in the past week or so for some of you. So the first one we're going to touch is handling the 4 most common objections. We're going to dispel some misbeliefs, some myths and facts and data. People like to work with smart people. So we're going to actually help to educate you and make you smarter than the average bear. And hopefully people will trust and value your opinion and your confidence, if you will. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to create some urgency. So we all know in the game there's nothing worse than getting on the phone with Crystal and she says, I'm going to wait for X. I'm waiting for Y. And every time you call, there's some other excuse. What we're going to do is try to create some language patterns. I'm going to give you some scripts and some dialogues to help you dial in the customer and bring them back in closer to you and get them to make a decision sooner as opposed to later. The other thing is we're going to help educate them and get them off the fence. I mean, how do you educate somebody? It's asking questions. Believe it or not, it's not telling them information. It's asking questions about what specifically is stopping you from making a decision, Mr. Jones. The more you can ask questions, the easier it is for you to close people. And for some of you people that have been around for a long time, you're going to do it naturally, intuitively. I know Carolyn and I were like kind of joking around when she first got on. When we first started, we weren't texting people. A lot of times people were coming to our office and we were meeting them belly to belly. And nowadays with technology, a lot of times you're making that communication via a technology, or you're using a chat, you're using a SMS message, you're using a voice, you're using your email. And really what you want to start to figure out is what is the language that your customer likes to communicate in. If they work on a trading floor, a lot of times they're going to use text. So maybe you want to communicate with that person on text. Ideally, if you're a person that doesn't like the text, you probably don't want to work with people that don't like the text. You might want to find people that are more like yourself. And people like to do business with people like themselves. Hey, if you're listening or paying attention, can you guys just put in the chat, hey, I'm listening and I'm hearing what you're saying. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page before I go on. So about me, I'm listening. Dominique, I'm listening. So, a little bit about me. I kind of told you a little bit. My career started on the construction side of real estate. I got out of the Army. I was a Ranger in the Army, a little bit disciplined, a little anal retentive, I guess is probably the word I'm looking for. I read a book called How to Develop a Six-Figure Income by Mike Ferry. That was 28 years ago. I read the book cover to cover, and I started doing real estate part-time. I did real estate part-time for about an hour and a half. I kid you not. I worked a full-time job, and in my first year in the business, I actually closed like 112 rentals in Hoboken, but I also did 27 real estate transactions for sales in my first year. And I realized that, when my broker came to me and said, hey, you're in the wrong business. You need to quit your day job. And I said, oh my God, I got benefits. I can't do that. So, and at some point I did make the jump. I was on the sales side. I've owned my own company. I've been through every market imaginable. I worked in Hoboken when September 11th happened. God bless those people that did pass away during that period of time, but it had a huge impact on my business. And the reason why I bring that to light is I worked through some of the more traumatic times in the business. I've worked through some more exciting times in the business. And all those different times had different things that were going on. But some of the things that never changed were getting in front of people. And what Jim Weichert used to say was get belly to belly with people and having conversations with them and finding out why or who. And I usually say there's 5 P's in real estate. There's properties, there's price, there's people, there's process, and there's profit. And when I say profit, it's not so much your profit. It could be your seller. It could be, the person who's benefiting from the transaction of moving in. They're no longer renting. They're now going to get a tax benefit. It really just depends. But if you really look at the real estate business, you want to simplify it to the bone. The easiest way I can tell you to do it is find a buyer, find a seller, get in the middle. That's your only job in real estate. And I mean, you can write that down. It's the easiest thing to remember is my job is find a buyer, find a seller, get in the middle. And depending on who you're representing, that's how you're going to play this hand. So first thing about it is let's look at this. What's really stopping consumers from buying or selling or upgrading a home right now, right? Anybody, can you guys put in the chat some of the objections that you're getting or some of the reasons why, like a one-liner on or two or three words on what's stopping people that you've been working with from buying a home or selling their house? And we'll, as I'm going through this, I'd love to try to answer your immediate concerns. So I see here price, rates. The rates haven't come down far enough. We're lack of inventory. Everything is more expensive and they aren't making as much money. Limited funds, interest rates, houses, prices. So you're all on the right path. And we're all waiting for the inevitable to happen. We're waiting for rates to come down, prices to go up, and I'm waiting for my hair to turn brown again. Probably not going to happen anytime soon. So let's look at reality and let's look at what we can control. So in the real estate transaction, or any transaction for that matter, there's going to be things that are in your control, things that are out of your control, and things that other people control. I'll say that again. There's things that are in your control, there's things that are out of your control, and there's things that are controlled by others. What are something that are controlled by others? That may be me, like your mortgage loan officer, who says, hey, I'm going to get you to a closing or smooth and flawless closing in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And if you're calling me, or if I'm not calling you and you're calling me 5-6 weeks later and we're not ready to close, you're going to have a problem. And because that's out of your control, you want to make sure that the partners that you're partnering with, like the NCJAR affiliates, are going to be people that are vetted. They've been around for a long time, and we kind of know who they are and that they're going to deliver on their promises to you. The same as you're going to deliver on the promise to your customer we're going to do the same for you. And you're going to want to figure out what are the things that you can control in that conversation and what are the things that you don't have control over. Okay. So let's look at the first thing is we talked about this in the very beginning. I'm reluctant to give up my rate or move up. Right. So I think I out of the 20 or 30 responses in the chat, probably half of them are about a rate. The other thing is I'm just waiting for rates to come down. Same conversation. I'm waiting for the housing prices and the rates to come down. Same conversation. I'm not going to overpay for a property, or I'm not paying over asking. Why would I do that? I want to get a deal. So when I was doing real estate, I would ask somebody, are you looking to get a deal or are you looking to buy a home? So when you're working with investors that are purely motivated by the numbers, they're looking for a deal. They're looking for the investment in the transaction, and how much are they buying it for? How much are they carrying it for? How much do they make on it? What's the tax deduction? And what is the end number at the end of the day, which is their net return on investment, right? But when you're buying a home for your family and you, it's a different game. You're looking at schools, you're looking at taxes, you're looking at the community, you're looking at the house, you're looking at affordability, you're looking at getting back and forth to work, you're looking about, you may be looking at downsizing, upsizing. Really depends on who you're working with and what their goal is. And again, it goes back to asking questions. My coach said, have conversations with customers without using words I or me. I'll say it again. By the way, it's extremely difficult to do. Try doing it with your spouse. Have conversations without using the words I or me. Unless they ask you a question about you, you can't actually say, hey, I suggest or I would recommend. When you're asking questions, though, now you can respond to their needs or their desires. There's something you want to write this down. It's an acronym called FORDS, FORDS. One of the best ways to have a conversation with somebody is there's two ways to do it. One of the things is an acronym called FORDS. It's family first, occupation, recreation, desires, and dreams. So what do I mean by that? Hey, Tom Jones, how are you today? Just wanted to check in with you, see how your family's doing. Great. How's work going? Really great. Hey, by the way, you still playing pickleball? You're still playing golf? Yeah, as a matter of fact, I am. Hey, if you had the perfect world, are you going to stay in your house? Or are you going to buy something different? Are you going to upgrade? Or are you going to downgrade? That, by the way, that's a normal conversation. I'm not giving you some magic script or something that you can't remember. If you met somebody playing pickleball, and in between playing pickleball, you'd probably say to them, hey, by the way, what do you do? What's your name? Oh, really? Where are you from? How long have you been there? Are you planning on moving soon? Right. By the way, if you do play pickleball or you play golf or you're doing some kind of activity, wear your colors, wear your shirt that says, hey, I work at Weichert, or I work at KW Realty, or I work, at Compass, or wherever your brand is. It's a conversation opener. And it's always better if they ask you, because it becomes an offensive conversation versus a defensive conversation. So I'm reluctant to give up my lower rate to move up. So I'm going to use a conversation, something that happened to me between Christmas and New Year's. Hey, do me a favor, put in the chat either yes, I worked between Christmas and New Year's that week, or no, I took off and relaxed. By the way, if you did relax, congratulations. I'm not so lucky. My brain doesn't really let me do that so much. Yes, I worked. Yes, I worked. No, I didn't work. So here's a funny thing. I went in my office on the Monday between Christmas and New Year's. I assume, now bear in mind, I work at a branch that is really not a branch. We're just a satellite office, and we're what they call a non-banking branch. So every once in a while, we'll have people ring our doorbell and they'll say, hey, I have to make a deposit. So I'm at my office. It's Monday. The person rings the doorbell, and it's a guy standing there in his mid to late 60s, and he's got a stack of stuff with him, and he's got a check in his hand. And before I could say, hey, we can't take your check here, he said, I'm trying to figure out my situation. I said, well, come on in. Let me have a conversation with you. In the conversation, I'm just going to put this out there. He had an interest rate that was 3.75% on a house that he's owned for 10 years. That house is worth about $850,000. When he said to me that he owed a bunch of money to some other people out of his control, right? And he was just treading water and working his second job after being retired twice. He had to go back to work to pay off the liabilities that he had. I started to ask more questions, and I said, hey, you know what? Come on in my office, have a seat. Let me see if I can help. The more I listened to him, the more I found out that he was the textbook person in the United States right now after COVID. The average person, you want to write this down, people like to do business with people that are intelligent, that give them data, not opinions. I'll say that again. People like to do business with people that give them data points and intelligent conversations, not opinions of, well, I think because. It's more about saying, and here's what you're going to share with them is the average American has over $274,000 in equity in their home right now. Again, they have $274,000 trapped in equity in their home. That money is getting zero interest and paying zero interest right now. What's interesting is they also have $95,000 in personal liabilities with an average interest rate of 23%. So when you start doing that math, and if you've got 100 grand, you're paying somewhere in the neighborhood of $3,000 to $4,000 a month just to make the bare minimum payments to tread water. So now if you have that person in that situation, in this particular situation, I said to the gentleman, I go, what if I could show you a Christmas miracle? And he said, what are you talking about? I was able to take his situation, take the equity out of his house, refinance that property, give him a mortgage that was actually going to have a rate that was almost twice as much. But here's the interesting thing. The rate went up to 6 3/8. But what's interesting is we paid off over $120,000 in personal equity, and I'm sorry, personal liabilities. And we gave him back $2,100 a month in his pocket after it was all said and done. Because before he was paying $4,000 a month for his mortgage and $2,500 a month for his liabilities. After we were done, he paid $5,000 a month and had zero liabilities. So that means that he had almost $2,000 that he was putting back in his pocket. And he said, when you do something like that for somebody, all of a sudden it changes their life to the point where this gentleman was in his mid-60s, started crying in my office. And I said to him, I go, it's nothing short of a Christmas miracle. The likelihood of, one, me being in the office on the Monday in between Christmas and New Year's, two, you finding my office because we're a satellite office, and three, going through the conversation to figure out how we can help you, it all added up to, wow, oh my God. So how does that look? How do you do that where somebody wants to maybe upgrade, but they're concerned about selling their house and getting rid of that trophy rate, if you will? Well, the trophy rate is only as good as the property they're living in. If the property they're living in no longer serves their needs or their desires, remember what I said, Fords, right? People, money isn't everything. By the way, if you look at what's called Maslow's hierarchy, it's a needs-based hierarchy. It's a triangle. And at the top, the very top is food and shelter. Right under that is what they call self-actualization or ego, something that's going to make you excited or make you happy or someone. And then all the way at the bottom is money. So the reality is giving somebody the inspiration to dream about going to that bigger house. And even though they're saying, oh my God, I don't want to let go of my interest rate. Well, here's an option. If they have $274,000 in equity in the house, does anybody know what you might want to offer that person? Can you put it in the chat if you had even the slightest idea? And Carolyn, I know you know the answer to this. What would you say if I said to you, hey, I'm thinking about upgrading to another house. I have this house that I bought was my starter house, and I have $300,000 in equity in there, but I'm not really sure if I want to make the move, and I don't want to get rid of that mortgage. Not refinance. That's good. It's a good guess though. What you could do is, and here's what you might suggest is, let's talk to Sean or let's talk to my mortgage lender about possibly unlocking some of the cash that's trapped in your house to go look for the new house. And then we'll rent out the property that you started in. So basically, instead of saying to somebody, oh my God, thank you, HELOC, yes, renting, yes. So by the way, unless you're not sure, real estate is the best investment you can get involved in. It's the only investment that's had up appreciation, except for 2 times in 100 years. One time was during the Depression, during 1938 and 1942. And the other time was during 2008, which I lived through, by the way. I still have scars on the back of my neck from doing short sales and everything else. But I can just tell you, on average, real estate has appreciated over 7.5% over 100 years. So, they're not making any more dirt. So if you own the dirt, or if you own a house on a piece of dirt, they're not making any more dirt. So once the dirt's gone, it goes up in value. And in this particular case, let's say for argument's sake, you have a seller that has a house that's worth $800,000. They owe $400,000. We can actually give them a cash out refinance for 80% of the value, which means that you could pull out 600 and change out of that house. You're going to pay off the original mortgage, which is going to leave them with $150,000 that they can now use to go purchase their next home. And if you're good, you could actually sit down and show them how to turn that other house into a real estate investment for them and their family, and to actually benefit from that, and also show them how to actually start to build wealth as opposed to just being a transactional agent. And what I mean by a transactional agent is they come to you, you say, yes, I want to sell you a house. Here's one. Let me show it to you. And then you never talk to them again. That's a transactional agent. The people that have been on here that are on here that have been around for years and decades at a clip, those people I know are not transactional agents because they've been helping their past clients and their center of influence over the years. By the way, if you stay to the end, I'm going to actually introduce you to what I call $1 million business plan. I'm going to give you 2 strategies for $1 million business plan, but you're going to have to stay to the end, and I will give them to you. So let's move on. Does everybody kind of understand that, hey, the trophy rate is not always the best thing to hang on to? If anybody, if that doesn't make sense, put up like a hold sign or something. Addressing the rate speculation. So, you know what? I got this question when I was on the real estate side. I did a lot of public speaking. I was on a bunch of different media channels and all that. So I would get the phone call a lot. Now, as a mortgage loan officer, I get text like anytime the FOMC, which is the federal, basically when the Fed meets to have the meeting to decide if they're going to reduce rates or not. That day, my phone blows up. I mean, like literally, I get 100 to 150 messages a day or calls on that day saying, "Hey, did it go up? Did it go down? Did my rate come down? Did my rate go up?" So here's the funny thing: is you've heard this, and if you've heard somebody say this to you, put yes in the chat. I'm going to say if you've heard this in the past 90 days, and if you got a heartbeat, you have to have a heartbeat, and you have to be vertical first of all in order to answer this, which I'm sure you are if you're here, by the way. Is I'm going to wait for interest rates to come down. Anybody heard that lately? Just maybe a handful of times. Yep, exactly. Oh my God, yes, sure, absolutely, all the time, right? Let me ask you this question. Has anybody heard which way does prices go when rates go down? Up, way up. So what's interesting is real estate is an inefficient market. So as the market shifts, it's like kind of like on Wall Street, they talk about buying the rumor, selling the news. I could sell a house on 123 Jones Street today for $100,000. And I could talk to the guy at 105 Jones Street and say, hey, I just sold this house over here for $100,000, and properties are appreciating. So when I sell your house next week, before anybody knows about it, we're going to get more for your house. But once everybody knows about it, it's going to continue to go up. Or if you're working with a buyer, which a lot of the people on here, when you first get started in real estate, a lot of times you're working with buyers. And the challenge is they say, oh my God, I want to wait until the rates come down. I'm not going to overpay for a house in this market, right? Here's the funny thing. Mr. Jones, would you like to pay less for the house or would you like to pay more? Well, I want to pay less, of course. Well, if we're going to do that, then we need to get in the market now before the rates go up. Well, why would I do that? Well, rates always change. You want to date the rate and marry the house. I'm going to say that again, date the rate and marry the house. The rate is something that can change. The price that you pay for the house is not. And here's the interesting thing. I say this I do a lot of physician loans. It's probably 60%, 70% of what I do now is private wealth and physicians. And I say to them all the time, if I bought a house and Crystal bought a house, and because I'm a physician, I can put 10% down with no PMI. Crystal has to buy that house with 20% down, or she has to pay PMI insurance or an additional cost. Okay. What's interesting is if we buy that house for $1 million and we sell it 2 years later for $1.1 million, we made $100,000 on our money, right? Everybody put yes or no if I made $100,000. What's interesting is this. Because I'm a physician, made 100% return on my investment of my 10%, my 100,000 I put down. Crystal, on the other hand, only made 50% on her money because she had to put down 20% or basically $200,000. So it really, when you start looking at numbers and you have people saying, "Hey, I'm worried about the rate. I'm going to wait for the rate." By the way, trying to time the interest rates is like hitting a moving target. I mean, there are world class economists like guys like Warren Buffett that you read about and stuff like that. But there's like Jamie Dimon, who was in charge of Chase Manhattan Bank. I mean, these people are literally quantitative geniuses. And what's interesting is the last thing they're going to do is try to time the market. So why would the average consumer trying to buy a home try to time the market? Right? It's ludicrous in my opinion, but you can actually forecast the market and say, hey, right now the Fed just reduced rates by a quarter of a point on the last meeting. What's interesting is interest rates went up, herding cats, right? Interest rates went up after they changed the rate, but interestingly enough, you're probably going to start to see rates coming down. And I'm not an economist. I'm just a guy who's been around for 30 years. The funny thing is that we're doing what they call light quantitative easing because we're going into April when everybody wants their paycheck for their tax returns. So it's one of the times when the government spits out a lot of cash. The other thing is that in addition to that, they're concerned about tariffs, and they're also concerned because for 2 or 3 months the government was shut down and the numbers that they got were a little inconclusive, if you will. So the Fed chairman said, you know what, we're going to stimulate the market and we're going to put cash into the market. And when they do that, it actually reduces the demand for money and it actually brings interest rates down, except that it takes time for that to happen. And then the other thing that's going to happen when you get closer to May, anybody know what happens in May of 2026 that may have an impact on the market? And it may be a great time for you to start looking at a house just before then, like now. So one of the things is, I'll give you the hint. It's got to do with the Fed Chairman Powell. Fed Chairman Powell's term comes up for renewal in May of 2026. When that happens, I don't care if you like Trump or hate Trump. I don't care either way. This is not a political forum. Please don't make it a political forum in the chat. But what's going to happen is they're going to put somebody who is sympathetic to our present campaign. And whatever they're doing, what's going to happen is they're going to replace them with somebody that is sympathetic to what the new administration wants done, which is to push down on interest rates, which, by the way, will have a great impact on the housing market. Interestingly enough, the Fed's job is not to mess around with interest rates. It's really to monitor against unemployment and monitor against inflation. But what's going to happen is, in my professional opinion, just to show that they can and to show strength, they're going to push on that person. They're going to get them reduced rates, and that's going to be a great time. The challenge is you have to have already been in the market and have a contract on a property before that happens, so that when it does happen, you can actually react to it. Next thing is debunking housing prices in the myth. I'm waiting for prices to come down. Anybody heard that one lately? So anybody thinking that they want to start to do short sales, or they've seen the webinars about doing foreclosures. Anybody in that market or been in that market in the past? Just put it in the chat if you have. Yes, 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 yes. Okay. So there's some people that are saying, and I went to a meeting recently and they said, hey, we're going to start to learn about short sales. And I said, well, that's interesting. In 2008 and 9, I actually taught the class at Weicker Realtors because I actually, people said, how'd you get so good at doing short sales, Sean? That's because I own 10 properties. I got caught with 3 of my own properties. And when you learn to short sell your own properties, you get really good at it. Over that period, I probably short sold about 300 or 400 properties for people during that period of time in my career between 2008 and probably 2014. But here's the interesting thing is prices are a function of 2 things: demand and inventory. There's only 2 things that make properties valuable. It's infrastructural change within the property or on the exterior of the property. For example, when I worked in Hudson County, New Jersey, I was selling properties by standing on the hill of Jersey City Heights and looking down and going, there's going to be a train at the bottom of that hill called the light rail. And when they put it in, these properties are going to go up in value. Well, what's interesting, I sold my house on Ogden Avenue for almost $500,000. About 5 years later, Mayor Fallope, who was the mayor of Jersey City, bought my old house, and he bought it for $900,000. It's now worth about 1.8. So, infrastructural change within a property or on the exterior of a property, both of them. The other thing that actually has a tremendous impact on pricing, and you already experienced this, is the number one, inventory. Demand and inventory. Right now, we have high demand and we have roughly about 2 months worth of inventory, which is, by the way, 400% more than it was a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Okay. But here's what's interesting is, what about the people that are trying to say that the foreclosures are coming back? I'm going to wait for, has anybody heard a customer say, we're waiting for the market to get saturated and for the foreclosures to come around again? That's going to change the market. By the way, right now, it's estimated that we need 300% more inventory to get a normal balanced market is 6 months, meaning that for every house, there's 6 months worth of inventory for the amount of buyers that are out there. So if people bought houses, if all the buyers bought houses today, there will be 6 months worth of inventory. So when I was selling homes in 2008, there was 10 buyers for every one house. Now there's probably 4 buyers for every one house or 3 buyers. What's interesting is, in order for you to see 19 bank approvals currently available in Morris County, what's interesting is, yes, but those are the 1%. And here's what's interesting about it. When I was doing foreclosures, when I quite honestly never did them as an agent, I just didn't have the patience for it. But I would buy them and sell them as an investor, and I would literally buy them over the phone. But what's interesting is, I would go to the HUD's website or the VA's website and look at the list, and I would search by New Jersey. And in that list would be about 10 pages with 15 to 20 properties on each page. Okay. If you go to the HUD website today and look at it, I would guess that there's probably 10 properties a page and maybe 3 pages of properties at the most. What's interesting, that is your indication of, should I focus on doing short sales or not, or should I focus on a foreclosure market? And when a customer comes to you and says, hey, I'm going to wait for the market to collapse, and I'm going to buy it when all hell breaks loose, I'm just going to buy the market. Well, guess what? Realistically, we would need 300% more inventory. We need more than 6 months worth of inventory for that to happen. Right now, we're at 3 months, and it's taking almost 6 years for us to go from a week's worth of inventory to 2.5 months. So I'm hard pressed to see how that's going to pan out, but you can let it go. My script for that, it was always the same. How long do you want to continue to rent and spend money as opposed to investing money? I'm going to say that again. How long do you want to continue to spend money versus investing money? Well, what do you mean, Sean? How many of you are aware of the American dream, have heard of the American dream in purchasing a home or selling a home? How many people here think they're part of that American dream? No crystal ball. So here's what is a crystal ball. What if I told you that you can get anywhere between a 20 and 30% return on an investment? Would you do it? Put in the chat if I was willing to give you a guaranteed investment of 20 to 30% today, would you do it? Yes, of course. Absolutely, right? Well, here, anybody heard of the tax write-off? So when people would say to me, hey, I'm going to continue to rent. Okay, great. How long have you been renting? Well, I pay $2,000 a month, and I've been renting for the past 3 years. Okay. So $2,000 a month that's 24 times 3, that's 60, that's 70, 72, if I'm not mistaken, right? So they've spent $72,000. Now, do me a favor, is if somebody has spent $72,000 in renting their home and their place to live, put in the chat how much their tax benefit is on that. I'll give you a hint. It's the lowest number on the keyboard in the number section. It's the 0. There's 0 tax benefit when you are paying money toward rent. When you purchase a home, absolutely, Iris. Thank you. Congratulations. When you purchase a home, you're going to write off all the money you pay toward interest on a loan, up to $750,000. And you're going to write off all the money you pay toward interest on all the money you pay toward property taxes, up to $10,000. So let's just say, for argument's sake, that same person that was investing, and this goes back to spending versus investing. You could either partner with Uncle Sam or you pay him. When you're renting, you're paying Uncle Sam. When you're buying, you're partnering with Uncle Sam. Why? Because when you're renting, the average person that's renting a house and making 80 or 100 grand a year has 0 tax benefit except for the single deduction. When you purchase a home, let's just say for argument's sake, that same person is now renting a home for the same $2,000. And their insurance is $100. So we're going to say their payment is $2,100. You're not going to get a tax benefit on the insurance. So you're going to get a tax benefit on your $2,000 a month, 72,000 times. Call it, even if I'm off by some numbers, say 30%. By the way, the average is 38% for the person who can afford to buy a house because they're at the highest tax bracket in order for them to even be able to afford it. But let's just use simple math and say 30%. 30% on 72, that's 21 and another six, that's $27,000. So again, Mr. Jones, do you want to continue to rent or did you want to continue shoving, you know, $9,000 a year into the toilet and flushing it down the toilet? When is now a good time to invest in real estate? But you don't understand, rates are high and prices are high. Yes, they are. But interestingly enough, they also keep going up in value. And by waiting, every time you're waiting, you're not only spending money by throwing away your tax deductible dollars, but you're also, while you're doing that, the market in present day, it doesn't always happen, but for the past 8 or 10 years, the market's been going up. And by the way, real estate goes in cycles. It goes in 8 to 10 year cycles. If you studied, I don't tell you this to impress you. I went to NYU for real estate analytics. It's one of the first things they teach you is real estate is cyclical. And it's about an 8 to 12 year cycle somewhere in there. We're about due for another cycle. So let's look at the next thing, overcoming price hesitancy. So anybody had this objection lately? I don't want to overpay for a house. I don't want to pay more than the market. Well, let me ask you this question. What determines the value of a home? What is the end all be all determiner for what the home is worth? Since we're not, we can't interact on this particular platform, I'm going to give you the answer. Always laugh out loud. Someone that's exactly right, Alicia. What somebody's willing to pay for it is exactly what that home is worth. And that's only what it's worth. So for years, I would have people say, but they want full asking price. And you'd be like, yes. But ironically enough, all the properties in this neighborhood have been selling at 107% of the asking price. And this property, based on my information, is priced fair to the market. So more than likely, it's going to sell at 107% of the asking price. Well, why would I pay more? So for years, I had a team. I operated a team, and I had one of my agents worked with a woman diligently and painstakingly for about 2.5 years. And I said, at some point, I said in our meeting one day, I said, how many appointments have you taken that person to go on? She said, I don't know, about like 50, 60. I go, what? My average amount of times that I would take somebody out to show them properties was 3 times, actually 2.5. I would show you the property the first time after doing some diligence and whittling down which properties we were going to go see on a computer first. Then I would take you to see 3 or 5 properties. Of that, you would make an offer on 1 or 2. And of those, you may have to go back and do some more research or go see it again with to make a final decision. Or I will walk you through it on the computer, which is that half. What's interesting is you may not be at that level, but here's the bottom line is a property is only worth if somebody's willing to pay for it. And that agent that worked for me and that was taking that person out, at some point I said, we need to get on the phone with the customer. And I said to him, I go, right now, you're going out and looking at properties. You're making offers on properties in a market, and you're making an offer at 5 and 8% below the listed price. And according to all the data that we have of the 17 properties that have sold in the past 3 months, they've sold at an average of 106% over the asking price. So if you're making offers at 6% below the asking price or the 6% below the fair market, and the properties are selling for 6% above, we're never going to close that gap. And quite honestly, you're wasting your time, you're wasting the agent's time, you're taking away from the time they're spending with their family, their kids. And the reality is this: people are, for the vast majority of people shopping for a home are fairly intelligent. If you sit down and share the data with them and show them the numbers to say why you're asking them to pay a certain number on the price and a certain premium for that house, at some point they may, on the first couple, I always look at those as like practice sessions. It's like going to play pickleball and they dink the ball back and forth, and then all of a sudden you start hitting the ball, right? those first two properties that they're making offers on, a lot of times they're dinking the ball back and forth. They're trying to get their arms around the market. It's not very often that you have somebody comes guns a blaring unless they really want to buy a house, or they're trying to buy the house that's right next to their family or their brother, their sister, their cousin. There are a lot of there are a lot of bidding wars, so your clients lose a lot of the homes. Therefore, you need to show them more homes. No, actually, I would disagree with you. I would agree that you may have to show them more homes if you're not able to bring them to educate them on the market. But if you're able to educate them on the market, you can actually determine if is it, I used to say this, I used to say it very politically correctly is they're shopping for Budweiser on a champagne budget, or they have champagne taste on a Budweiser budget. The reality is this: the property is only going to sell what the fair market is for. Nobody's giving their house away. Nobody's going to give you a deal or let you steal a house. And when I used to ask the question, are you looking for a deal or are you looking for a home? When somebody's looking for a deal, a competitive market is very, very challenging. And unless you really have really good negotiating skills, I'd suggest working with people that are looking for a home for their family and for the kids. Like I'll give you a little thing that I did. This is probably now 25 years ago. I worked in Hoboken in a market, which is, people say, oh my God, it's competitive. My market is competitive. Hoboken's a mile long. It's got 56 offices in a mile square and 14 blocks on Main Street, and it's within a mile. So when you talk about, and it's got 35 agents that are going to fight over about 700 transactions a year, which is 1,400 sides. And what I used to do to differentiate myself was a lot of my customers would ask me the two same questions when they were going to go out from the urban community to the suburbs. Where do I get the lowest taxes and the best SAT scores? So what I did, or the best school systems, what I did was I created a graph. And you could steal this idea. I did it years ago. It got me onto CNBC in the morning show on it got me on Bloomberg News, a couple of different things. What I actually did was I created for each county, I created a spreadsheet, and I took on the side at that time, the average price of I think it was $375,000. And on one side, I put all the SAT scores. And on the other side, I put the average tax for a property that was $350,000. So you could add a snapshot, go, okay, this town has the highest SAT scores and the lowest taxes. And then you look at the price and you'll say, okay, well, I can't afford that one. So now you go to the next one. And so now instead of showing people lots of houses and lots of neighborhoods, you can start to dial it down. And I used to say to people in my office, my agents, I would say, listen, your job is to put them into the colander. You know, the thing that, like, people who are Italian or from the Northeast, you may have heard of colander or the funnel. You're going to put them in the funnel and you're going to shake the funnel and get them to here. The last thing you want to do is once you get them down into a neighborhood in a town, and then all of a sudden they say, oh, what about this town over here? Because it's 4 miles away. It's only the next town over because they saw something on like from an agent that sent them a random email. You want to be able to dial in the customer to know where they want to shop so that when that property comes on the market, and if it doesn't come on the market, you want to know how to go find it. So you want to beat the bidding wars, Rana. I'll give you a great strategy. Wherever you lost the most recent house, go to that neighborhood the next day after you lose the deal and knock on the doors, 5 doors to the right of it, 5 doors to the left of it, and 10 doors across the street, and say, hey, I have a ready, willing, and able buyer that put a contract on that house over there and they lost it. They have 2 kids and they want to get them into schools this week. Do you have any interest in selling your house? And if you don't, do you know somebody who does? If you do that strategy, by the way, eventually you'll run into a deal. So what's the next thing that we're going to look at? Hopefully I'm starting to bring some light to this. We're going to bring this to a little bit to a closure. So summary, reluctant. Did I address the trophy rate? Did I give you some strategies on how to overcome that? Not timing the market is probably one of the number ones. Number 2 is instead of giving up the rate, let them keep the rate and buy another house. The next one is waiting on rates to come down. Obviously, we talked about that. We are going in that direction, but by the time the rate comes down, the prices will go up twice as fast or 3 times as fast. Waiting for prices to fall. We kind of talked about that. The only way that that's going to happen is one of 2 things. Rates go through the roof, or inventories come in leaps and bounds. We have a resurgence of inventory that's going to saturate the market, which is probably not going to happen. And why should we overpay for a house versus the asking? The bottom line is if you're spending money for renting and you continue to spend money and you're not willing to, you're gonna lose. Like I said, in 3 years it was 27,000. What's interesting, one of the things I didn't point out was how many of you had a customer say, "I'm not willing to pay $400,000 for that house," and then 6 months later they come back and they say, "Hey, I'm ready to pay 400,000 now," and you say, "Well, that's great, but the problem is that house is now worth 450 or 475." The challenge is in this market, in most cases, the properties are going up. Even if they're not going up, what's going up? As rates come down, demand goes up, and it makes it more challenging. And like I said before, smart people make the smart decisions with smart people. If you can give people logic and data in addition to having a normal conversation with them, not sounding like a computer, you're going to win every time. So again, my name is Sean. Sean Childs from U.S. Bank. We're the fifth largest bank in the United States. We have a complete. We're not just. We don't just sell mortgages. We're an actual complete depository bank. We have some of the lowest rates in the country. We have products. I specialize personally in private wealth, physician loans. I do what they call construction of perm loans. We actually do loans on lots. And then also I do veterans because I'm a veteran myself. For By the way, if there's any other veterans on this call, thank you for your service, and we do appreciate you. And by the way, if you're not involved, you may want to look at, it's called VRAP. It's Veterans Association of Real Estate Professionals. The other thing is that if you're a veteran, you want to get in touch with Pat at the NCJAR affiliates program, because I can't remember the woman's name, who's heavily involved in helping the veterans with the food pantry. But they could really use your help. And if you have a sweet spot for that or a soft spot in you for that, please help. They could use it. The other thing is, figuring out what products, the bottom line is this. I had a moniker for my name for years, which was Realty Coach. I created an app. I'm here to help you. I'm not competing with you. I've actually haven't done a real estate transaction, like I said, in about 4.5 years. I don't intend to either. People said, "Why did you stop doing real estate?" And I said, quite honestly, thank you for putting that in the chat. Debbie Flowers is the VA food pantry, and Pat can help you out with that. Quite honestly, I got to a point where I really got burnt out. But what I love doing, and my mentor and my manager, I was coaching his salespeople one day in the mortgage office, and he said, "You talk about real estate, your eyes glaze over." And I said, "If I do another transaction," I go, after doing, 2,000 transactions, I'm a little burnt out. And he said, "Yeah, but when you're coaching our salespeople, you get so excited, we got to pull you off the ceiling." And he goes, "You're in the wrong business." And quite honestly, he was right. I moved into the mortgage space. I couldn't be happier. And the other thing is too, is before we wrap this up, if you want to grab a call with me, I'm more than happy to sit down and look at your business. I've coached probably 1,500, 2,000 people over the years. My specialty for KW MAPS coaching, my mentors and coaches were the people that started that whole program. Diana Kokoska wrote the book on the BOLD program. I would coach with her husband 20 years ago. Bottom line is my expertise is helping people look for the what I call the hole in their business, or their $1 billion blind spot. And Gary Keller talks about it all the time. If there's is there one thing in your business that we can actually find and either plug the hole or push on it or get it out of the way, that can actually take your business from where you are to where you want to get to without actually more stress and without spending money? That's what I would like to help you with. Lastly, again, that's my information. I'm going to leave this back up here. I do wanted to thank, like I said, Crystal, Ella, Bella, the whole team over at NCJAR, and the new president. Thank you for taking hold of the reins. For Pat, for being part of the affiliate program. And if there's anybody who has any questions, or if they want more information, again, thank you. I do appreciate it. Thank you, Angela. One of the things I would highly, highly, highly suggest, the more that you can actually ask us for information and stuff to support you, and the more questions you bring the team, the more we can actually provide for you and help you to build your business. If there's anything else I can do for you, please raise your hand. Carolyn, thanks so much. It's always a pleasure. And you know what? You're just, and I'm sorry, I just love I love this part of the business. I wish I could do this all day long. So I'm going to give it back to Ella, who's been awesome. and go from there.
Thank you, Sean. So Sean sent us his presentation today and the shareable materials, and we will send that over to all who attended for today's webinar. Thank you so much for coming on. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at info@ncjr or call us at 973-425-0110. Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you.